On a calm morning in a small coastal town, a fisherman set out on his usual route, unaware that this day would change everything. For years he had been waking up before the sun, leaving the safety of the harbor and heading into the open water. It was a life he had grown used to and one he enjoyed. The sea was unpredictable, but over time he had learned to understand its rhythms, its moods, and its secrets. The old boat creaked as it bobbed gently on the water. The fisherman, an older man with weathered hands and a thick beard, checked the nets, making sure everything was in order. He had been fishing these waters for decades, and today was no different than any other. He tossed the lines into the sea, letting them sink deep into the water. For a while, there was nothing but the sound of the gentle waves lapping against the hull, and the occasional call of a seagull overhead. As the hours passed, the fisherman adjusted his course slightly, drifting farther from shore. The morning mist was beginning to lift, revealing the bright blue sky. He glanced back toward the coast where the small fishing village sat nestled against the cliffs. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful for someone who had spent his whole life in the busy world of fishing. But on the water, the fisherman felt at home. It wasn't until late in the morning that he noticed something strange. The net he had set hours earlier tugged in a way he had never felt before. It was heavier than usual. He assumed it was just a large fish or maybe a school of them. But as he began to reel in the line, he felt the pull growing stronger. This wasn't the gentle tug of a fish. It was something much more stubborn, more solid. Curiosity tugged at him as he grabbed the winch and began pulling the net closer to the boat. The surface of the water was calm, the air still, and yet the weight on the other end of the line felt off. After several minutes of effort, he finally saw it. His heart skipped a beat. It wasn't a fish. It wasn't even something natural. The fisherman's hands trembled slightly as he stared at the object in the net. It was large, cylindrical, and rusted, with barnacles and seaweed clinging to its surface. It looked as though it had been down there for years, maybe even decades. But what was it? He had no idea. His first instinct was to cut it loose. It could be debris from an old shipwreck or something left behind by a passing boat. But there was something about it, something strange and unsettling that made him hesitate. He had seen his share of wreckage and old junk pulled up from the deep, but this was different. With a sense of growing intrigue, the fisherman carefully pulled the object aboard the boat. It was heavy, far heavier than it looked, and he struggled to balance it on the deck. As he wiped away the seaweed and barnacles, he could make out faint markings along the sides. They weren't anything like the familiar numbers and labels he had seen on old barrels or crates before. These symbols were odd, curved lines, spirals, and patterns that seemed almost alien. The fisherman didn't know what to think. His mind raced with possibilities. Was it from a foreign ship? Something that had drifted across the ocean? Or was it something more mysterious? The markings looked ancient, like something that had been made a long time ago, long before he was even born. He walked around the object, examining it closely. It was smooth in some places, rough in others. The rust had eaten away at parts of it, but in certain spots he could see faint glimmers of metal beneath. It seemed to pulse with an energy, or perhaps it was just the weight of the mystery it carried. For a moment the fisherman felt an odd chill run down his spine, but he quickly shook it off. After a few moments of uncertainty, he decided to head back to the harbor. There was no way he could deal with this alone. He needed answers. As the boat crept slowly through the water, the object resting awkwardly on the deck, the fisherman's mind was buzzing with questions. What was it? Where had it come from? And most importantly, why had it ended up in his net? When he reached the harbor, the fisherman knew that he couldn't keep the object to himself. It was too strange, too out of place. He needed to show it to someone, anyone, who might have an idea of what it could be. As he pulled the boat up alongside the dock, he saw a few other fishermen gathered near the edge, chatting as they unloaded their catches. They looked up when they saw the old boat return, its deck crowded with the mysterious object. "Hey, what's that?" one of them called out, pointing at the metal object. "I'm not sure," the fisherman replied, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "It was in my net. Never seen anything like it." The others walked over, their curiosity piqued. They circled the object, poking it, knocking on it with their fists, and running their hands over the strange symbols. Each of them had their own theory, but none of them could agree on what it was. One fisherman joked that it was a treasure chest from an old pirate ship. Another suggested it might be a piece of military equipment, something lost at sea during a storm. "I've never seen anything like it," one of the men said, tapping the object thoughtfully. It looks kind of foreign, like it doesn't belong here. The fisherman nodded in agreement. That's what I thought too. They all stood there for a while, silently studying the object, but no one could make sense of it. It was unlike anything they had ever come across in their years of fishing. I'm going to take it to the marina, the fisherman said, his voice quiet but firm. I know a marine biologist over there. She might be able to figure out what this is. The others nodded, still looking at the object with a mixture of fascination and confusion. One of the men offered to help carry it, but the fisherman declined. He wanted to take it himself, as though he needed to keep the mystery close for just a little longer. As he walked away from the dock, the object still heavy in his hands, the fisherman's thoughts ran wild. Was this the start of something strange? Something dangerous? Or was it just another piece of forgotten history, lost beneath the waves for decades? The answer, he knew, wasn't going to be easy to find. But whatever it was, he had a feeling that this mysterious object was going to lead him down a path he never expected, one that would change his life forever. The fisherman made his way to the marina, the heavy rusted object still resting awkwardly in the back of his boat. It wasn't easy to move, and it wasn't just the weight that made it difficult. It was the sense of unease that seemed to hang around it. It was as if the object was calling out to him, asking him to uncover its secrets, but he wasn't sure if he was ready for whatever answers it might offer. When he arrived at the marina, the morning bustle of fishermen unloading their catches and workers going about their tasks was in full swing. He walked past the small boats, the wooden docks, and the warehouses where crates of fish were being stacked. As he approached the marine biologist's office, he paused for a moment. He had heard of Dr. Harper, a scientist who specialized in ocean life and marine research. She was well respected in the town, known for her knowledge and dedication, but more importantly, she was the type of person who might be able to make sense of something like this. The fisherman knocked on the door to her office. After a few seconds, the door creaked open, and there she stood, Dr. Harper. She was a middle-aged woman with short, dark hair, a pair of glasses perched on her nose, and a look of calm professionalism in her eyes. Good morning, the fisherman greeted her, lifting the object slightly to show it to her. I've got something I think you'll want to see. She raised an eyebrow and stepped aside, letting him enter her office. The room smelled faintly of salt water and the sharp, clean scent of the chemicals she often worked with. There were papers scattered around the room, along with a few fish tanks housing various sea creatures she studied. What's this? Dr. Harper asked, her voice curious but calm. The fisherman set the object down gently on the table, careful not to damage it. As it rested there, Dr. Harper leaned in, examining it closely. She seemed intrigued but not immediately alarmed. I found it out in the water this morning, the fisherman explained, his voice still carrying that edge of uncertainty. It came up in my net. I've never seen anything like it before. Dr. Harper nodded, her fingers tracing the strange markings on the metal surface. She looked thoughtful for a moment, then turned to him. You've got a good eye, she said. Not many people would have stopped to bring something like this in. Most would have cut it loose or thrown it back into the water. But there's something about it, isn't there? The fisherman nodded. He couldn't quite explain why he felt compelled to bring it to her, but it just felt like the right thing to do. I don't know what it is, he said, but I have a feeling it's not just junk. Something about it doesn't feel right. Dr. Harper smiled slightly, though her eyes remained focused on the object. She turned toward a small workbench, pulling out a few tools. Let's see if we can figure it out, she said. The next hour passed in relative silence as Dr. Harper carefully examined the object. She measured its dimensions, noted the patterns and markings on its surface, and took a few photographs. The fisherman watched closely, not saying much, just waiting for her to come to a conclusion. Eventually, Dr. Harper set her tools down and stepped back, rubbing her chin thoughtfully. Well, it's definitely not something I've seen before, she said. The markings, for one, aren't anything like what you'd find on modern shipping containers or wreckage. These symbols, they look ancient, like something from a long-lost civilization. And the material, this metal, it's not quite like anything I know either. It doesn't match any of the alloys we typically use for boats or machinery. The fisherman felt a thrill of excitement, mixed with a bit of anxiety. The idea that this thing could be ancient or even from a lost civilization seemed too wild to be true. But then again, what else could it be? If it wasn't man-made, then what was it? I don't want to jump to conclusions, Dr. Harper continued, but this is certainly an anomaly. It's possible it's something historical, maybe even a relic from an older time. We'll need to run some tests to be sure. I've got access to some equipment that might help us understand what this thing is made of and where it might have come from. The fisherman nodded, though a part of him wasn't sure if he wanted to know the answer. What if this led to something dangerous? What if it turned out to be a mistake to bring it into the open? But curiosity won out. After all, he had brought it this far. There was no turning back now. You can test it? He asked, his voice quiet. Dr. Harper nodded. I'll run some tests this afternoon. It'll take some time to get any results, but we can start with the basics. I'll need to analyze the metal and get a sense of its composition. If we're lucky, we'll be able to track its origins. The fisherman felt a sense of relief. At least now he wouldn't be alone in trying to figure this out. He wasn't sure where this path would lead, but at least he had someone experienced by his side. He stood up, ready to leave the office. I'll check back with you later then, he said. Dr. Harper gave a small smile. I'll let you know if anything interesting comes up. But don't worry, we'll get to the bottom of this. With that, the fisherman left her office and made his way back to his boat. His mind was swirling with possibilities, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was at play. The object was too strange, too mysterious to be a simple piece of debris. That evening, as he sat in his small house overlooking the harbor, the fisherman found himself staring at the ocean, lost in thought. He had been fishing these waters for years, but he had never encountered anything like this. The sea, which had always seemed so familiar, now felt different. It was as if it held secrets that he had never even begun to understand. He wondered if Dr. Harper would discover something that could explain it all. Maybe the metal was from an old shipwreck. Maybe it had been down there for centuries, waiting to be found. But deep down, he had a nagging feeling that this was no ordinary find. Something about it, something in his gut, told him that the answers weren't going to be easy to find. The next day, Dr. Harper called him with news. She had run the initial tests, and though they were still inconclusive, one thing was certain. The object was far older than anyone had imagined. The metal wasn't just ancient, it was of an entirely different composition than anything they had in the modern world. We're going to need to bring in some experts, she said over the phone. This could be bigger than we thought. The fisherman's heart raced as he listened to her words. It was clear now that whatever this object was, it was more than just an oddity. It was a mystery that was unraveling, and it was pulling him deeper into a world he had never imagined. Days passed since the fisherman had first brought the strange object to the marina, and the mystery surrounding it only deepened. Dr. Harper had called in a few specialists to assist with the analysis, but each new test seemed to raise more questions than answers. The fisherman had no idea how deep this rabbit hole would go, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he had stumbled onto something much bigger than he could have imagined. The object sat in Dr. Harper's lab, surrounded by various tools and scientific equipment. Each expert who examined it left with a puzzled expression, and that only fueled the fisherman's curiosity. He visited Dr. Harper every day, hoping for new revelations. But each time he walked into her lab, the look on her face seemed to tell him more than words could. It was early in the week when she finally called him, sounding more excited than she had in days. You need to come down here, she said. We've made a breakthrough. His heart skipped a beat as he rushed to the marina. The air was cool, the kind of crisp chill that comes just before the sun fully rises. The boat was still docked at the same place where he'd left it, and the object was still inside Dr. Harper's lab. But there was something different in the air. There was a quiet urgency in Dr. Harper's voice, and as he stepped into her office, he saw her standing over a desk littered with papers, diagrams, and open books. This is incredible, she said, her voice trembling slightly with excitement. She pointed to a set of images on the desk, a detailed map, strange symbols, and a set of coordinates marked with circles. The fisherman stood quietly, unsure of what he was seeing. What is all this? He asked. Dr. Harper looked at him, her eyes wide. We've been trying to decode the markings on the object, and it turns out those symbols aren't just random. They're part of an ancient system of navigation, one that hasn't been seen for centuries. These aren't just markings on a piece of metal. They're coordinates. The fisherman's mind raced. Coordinates? Like a map? Dr. Harper nodded. Exactly. But not just any map. The coordinates lead to specific locations. Some of them are here in the ocean, while others point to places on land. It looks like whoever made this object was marking out a route, She handed him one of the papers, a close-up of the symbols and coordinates. He scanned it, feeling a mixture of confusion and wonder. "But where does it lead?" he asked. Dr. Harper looked down at the papers, her fingers tracing the lines. "We don't know yet. But what we do know is that these locations are significant. They're linked to several ancient civilizations that were believed to have vanished. If this object is what we think it is, then it's a key to understanding something much bigger." The fisherman swallowed hard. He had always been just a simple man, a fisherman with no interest in history or archaeology. He had spent his life on the sea, pulling in fish and selling them to the town, nothing more. But now, it seemed as though his life had taken a turn he never could have predicted. He was standing on the edge of something that could change everything. "You're saying this thing could be connected to lost civilizations?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Harper's eyes were filled with excitement. "Yes, and if we follow these coordinates, we might be able to uncover a history that's been hidden for thousands of years." The fisherman felt a surge of adrenaline. He had always wondered about the sea's secrets, the way it could hide things for centuries, waiting for someone to find them. But now, it seemed that the secrets weren't just hidden beneath the waves. They were tied to the land as well. The object in front of him was a key to unlocking that mystery. But as the excitement began to settle in, the fisherman felt another emotion creeping in: fear. What if they were treading into dangerous territory? What if the people who had created this object had hidden it for a reason? The more he thought about it, the more questions arose. What if they were not the first to find it? And what would happen if they followed the map, only to uncover something they weren't meant to find? He tried to push the fear aside. There was no going back now. The object was already in their hands, and it had already started a journey that neither of them could predict. "I think we should go to one of the locations," Dr. Harper said, breaking the silence. "We have to start somewhere, right?" The fisherman nodded. "Where do we begin?" Dr. Harper looked at the map again. "There's a location just a few miles off the coast. It's near some underwater caves that haven't been fully explored. That's where we should start." The fisherman hesitated for a moment. He had spent his whole life fishing these waters, but he had never ventured that far out. The ocean could be unpredictable, and the thought of diving into unexplored caves made him uneasy. But he could sense the determination in Dr. Harper's voice, and he knew that if they were going to uncover the truth, they had to take that first step. "All right," he said, "let's go." The two of them set out the following morning, taking the fisherman's boat as close to the coordinates as they could. The air was thick with anticipation, the kind that comes right before a big storm. The sea was calm, almost too calm, as though it was waiting for something to happen. The fisherman gripped the wheel tightly, keeping his eyes on the horizon. Dr. Harper stood beside him, her eyes fixed on the map, her finger tracing the route as they neared the underwater caves. "Are you sure this is the place?" the fisherman asked, looking over at her. Dr. Harper nodded. "Yes, the coordinates point to a spot just offshore, but it's not marked on any modern maps. That's why no one's explored it. This is the first time anyone's come this close." They reached the caves just as the sun was beginning to set. The sky was painted with shades of orange and purple, and the water turned darker as the evening approached. The caves loomed ahead, their entrances barely visible beneath the surface. The fisherman felt a sense of awe mixed with unease. "Let's get the equipment ready," Dr. Harper said, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. They prepared their gear, scuba tanks, ropes, and flashlights, before carefully making their way to the edge of the boat. The fisherman took one last look at the boat, then at Dr. Harper before slipping into the water. The caves were colder than he had expected. The water felt heavy, thick with mystery as they swam through narrow passages. Their flashlights illuminated the walls, revealing jagged rocks and strange markings etched into the stone. Dr. Harper's voice came through his headset, calm but excited. "This is it. This is what we've been looking for." The fisherman's heart raced as they moved deeper into the cave. The water grew darker, and the silence was broken only by the sound of their breathing and the faint echo of their movements. He felt like they were diving into the heart of an ancient secret, one that had been buried beneath the sea for centuries. As they rounded a corner, the beam of the flashlight caught something unexpected, an archway carved into the rock. It wasn't natural. Someone had built it, shaped it with care. The fisherman felt his breath catch in his throat. They had found something incredible. But what would they find next? Was this just the beginning? Or were they about to uncover something that should have stayed hidden forever? The fisherman's heart thudded in his chest as he floated in the dark waters of the cave, his flashlight illuminating the strange archway carved into the stone. The light flickered for a moment, but the beam remained steady as it swept across the intricately designed stonework. It was clear this was no natural formation. Someone had put time and effort into shaping the archway, and that thought alone sent a chill down the fisherman's spine. He glanced over at Dr. Harper, who was motioning for him to follow her. They swam closer to the entrance, the dark water now pressing against them from all sides. The cold felt deeper here, as though the cave held centuries of secrets within its walls. The air in their masks was thick with the tension of the unknown. "Do you think anyone's been here before?" The fisherman's voice crackled through his headset. Dr. Harper didn't answer immediately. She was scanning the walls, her light catching on the carvings and patterns etched into the stone. "I don't know," she replied, her voice low. "But if they have, they didn't leave any sign of it. This place looks untouched. These carvings, they're unlike anything I've seen before." The fisherman swam closer to her, his curiosity now fully piqued. The designs were unlike anything he'd ever seen on a shipwreck or in the small artifacts that sometimes washed up on shore. The symbols were different, more complex, more refined. They almost seemed to tell a story, as though they were part of some kind of ancient language. As they neared the entrance, the water became lighter, and the cave opened up into a vast chamber. The size of it was staggering, and the further they swam, the more the light revealed. The walls were lined with stone columns, and in the center of the chamber a large pedestal rose from the ground, encased in a faint glow from the beam of their flashlights. "What is this place?" the fisherman asked, his voice almost a whisper. "I don't know," Dr. Harper answered, her voice full of awe. "But whatever it is, it's important. Look at the way the pedestal's set up. It's deliberate, meant to draw attention." The fisherman nodded, his eyes glued to the pedestal. There, resting at the top, was something that looked both familiar and completely foreign. It was another object, though much smaller than the one they had found on the boat. Its shape was geometric, square with sharp, clean edges that didn't seem to belong in a place like this. It shimmered faintly in the beam of their flashlights as if it had some internal glow. Dr. Harper was the first to reach it, her hand reaching out slowly, almost reverently. The fisherman watched her closely, his instincts telling him to be careful, to keep a safe distance. "I don't know what this is, but it feels like it belongs here," she murmured as she gently placed her hand on the object. For a long moment, nothing happened. The water seemed to stand still, as though the entire chamber was holding its breath. And then, slowly, the object began to shift. The fisherman's heart skipped. The object's surface rippled like water, and before he could react, a loud click echoed through the cave. The pedestal seemed to open up, a hidden compartment revealing itself. Dr. Harper stepped back, her face pale with shock. "What just happened?" the fisherman asked, his voice tight with unease. I don't know," Dr. Harper said, eyes wide, still staring at the now open pedestal. Inside, there was a small compartment, empty, save for a few strange crystalline objects that seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. The fisherman approached slowly, his eyes scanning the compartment. The crystals looked almost too perfect, too pristine for something that had been buried underwater for so long. They shimmered with a light that was unnatural, but it wasn't the glow that caught his attention. It was the markings on the stones. They were similar to the ones on the object he had found in his net. The same spirals, the same odd symbols. "What do you think this is?" he asked. Dr. Harper didn't answer immediately. She was examining the crystals closely, turning one over in her hands. "It's like a map," she said softly, "but not like any map I've ever seen. These symbols are coordinates. Some of them match the ones we found earlier." The fisherman blinked. "Coordinates? For what?" I think they're part of a larger system. These could be markers, guiding us to something even bigger. The object we found, the one in your boat, is just the beginning. This chamber, these crystals, they might be connected to a much larger network of sites hidden across the globe." The fisherman felt a mix of excitement and confusion. "You mean there's more of these things out there? More chambers like this one?" Dr. Harper nodded. "It's possible. If these objects are part of a lost civilization, then they may have built a series of these locations. They were trying to preserve something, or maybe they were using these sites as waypoints. but we don't know what they were trying to achieve. The fisherman glanced back at the pedestal, then down at the glowing crystals. They seemed so small, so insignificant in the vastness of the cave, but their weight felt enormous, as though they held the answers to questions that had been buried for centuries. "We need to take these back with us," Dr. Harper said, her voice more determined now. "If we're going to understand what this is all about, we need to study them further." The fisherman hesitated. He had already gone farther than he had ever imagined. Was it really safe to take these strange objects back to the surface? The thought of carrying something so mysterious, so potentially dangerous, made him uneasy. "What if we shouldn't take them?" he asked, his voice quiet. "What if this is something we weren't supposed to find?" Dr. Harper turned to him, her expression serious but filled with resolve. "We're already this far in. We've uncovered something that could change the way we understand history. We can't just leave it here." The fisherman nodded slowly. He knew she was right. There was no turning back now. Whatever was in this cave, whatever secrets lay beneath the surface of the ocean, they couldn't just walk away from it. Together, they carefully collected the crystals, each one wrapped carefully in cloth to protect it. The journey back to the surface was slow, their minds racing with the implications of what they had just uncovered. They swam back to the boat, the dark waters parting before them as they ascended to the safety of the surface. Once they were back on the boat, Dr. Harper immediately began scanning the crystals with her equipment, trying to analyze them further. The fisherman kept a close eye on the horizon, the feeling of unease not quite leaving him. The sea, once so familiar to him, now seemed like a vast, unknowable place. "What happens next?" he asked, staring out at the water. Dr. Harper didn't look up from her work, but her voice was firm. "Next, we figure out what these objects are for, and we follow the trail wherever it leads." The fisherman took a deep breath, looking at the ocean one last time. He had always known there was more to the sea than met the eye. But now, standing on the edge of this discovery, he understood that the ocean held secrets far beyond anything he had ever imagined. And with that, he knew there was no turning back. The days that followed were a blur of activity. The fisherman and Dr. Harper spent hours in her lab, analyzing the crystals and the object that had first brought them to this strange journey. With each passing hour, they discovered more about the ancient symbols and the hidden meanings within the carvings. They learned that the coordinates on the objects weren't just random numbers. They were specific to certain places on Earth, marking locations with great significance. Dr. Harper had reached out to other experts, historians, archaeologists, and even astronomers, hoping to make sense of the pieces they had uncovered. But despite their best efforts, no one seemed to have any concrete answers. Everyone agreed that what they had found was extraordinary, but the true nature of the objects remained elusive. The fisherman, meanwhile, struggled with the implications of it all. He had always known the sea had its secrets, but this felt like something else entirely. He had spent his life on the water, pulling in fish and living a quiet, simple life. But now everything had changed. The sea no longer felt like home. It felt like a vast, unknown world full of mysteries he had no way of understanding. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were getting closer to something important. The more they uncovered, the more it seemed like these objects were part of a greater puzzle, one that spanned not just the ocean, but the entire world. Dr. Harper's obsession with the crystals and their hidden meanings grew. She spent days looking through ancient texts, searching for any connection to the symbols and coordinates they had found. Slowly, she pieced together a theory. The objects were part of a map that guided those who had created them to hidden locations across the world. These locations, she believed, held the key to an ancient civilization's greatest secrets. The fisherman listened to Dr. Harper's theories, but in the back of his mind, something still bothered him. What if they were wrong? What if all their research and all their effort was leading them down a path that could bring nothing but danger? But there was no turning back now. He could see it in Dr. Harper's eyes. The determination to understand, to uncover whatever secrets lay hidden beneath the surface. He couldn't just walk away from that, so they planned their next move. Dr. Harper had identified one of the coordinates they had found on the crystals, a remote island far to the south. The island had never been fully explored, and the people who had lived there centuries ago were long gone. The map they had uncovered pointed to a specific location on the island, and Dr. Harper believed that there might be more objects like the one they had found. The fisherman wasn't sure about traveling so far from home, but Dr. Harper's enthusiasm was contagious. The idea of uncovering more pieces of the puzzle, of finally understanding what all of this meant, was too tempting to resist. They set out early one morning, the boat cutting through the still waters as they made their way south. The journey was long and tiring, but the fisherman was used to long days on the water. The rhythmic motion of the boat, the sound of the engine hum and the wind against his face provided a strange sense of comfort. It was as if the sea was offering its own kind of reassurance, even though it had grown more mysterious and unpredictable in the past few weeks. As they neared the island, the fisherman could feel the tension rising. The island appeared on the horizon, small and isolated. The closer they got, the more it felt like a place out of time, like it had been forgotten by the world. They anchored the boat near the shore and gathered their equipment, flashlights, ropes, and cameras. The island was covered in thick jungle and the heat was oppressive. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and rotting wood, but the fisherman wasn't concerned with that. He was focused on the task at hand. Dr. Harper led the way, her map in hand, her eyes scanning the dense vegetation for any sign of the markings they had seen in the cave. The fisherman followed closely behind, unsure of what they would find but determined to keep moving forward. They trekked through the jungle for hours, the dense foliage making it difficult to navigate. Sweat trickled down their faces, and the sounds of the jungle, birds calling, insects buzzing, and the occasional rustle in the trees, made the place feel alive, almost as though the island itself was watching them. Finally, they reached a clearing and the fisherman froze in his tracks. In the center of the clearing was a structure, a ruin covered in moss and vines. The stone was worn, but the shape of it was unmistakable. It was the same type of stonework they had seen in the cave, with the same strange symbols etched into the surface. The fisherman took a deep breath. They had found it. Dr. Harper stepped forward, her voice filled with awe. "This is it," she whispered. "This is the location the map was pointing to. These ruins. They must be the remains of the civilization that created the objects." The fisherman stood back, letting Dr. Harper explore. She was examining the carvings on the walls, tracing her fingers over the patterns. The symbols matched those on the crystals and the object they had found in the boat. Everything was falling into place, but something still didn't feel right. The fisherman couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. The jungle was quiet now, the sounds of the birds and insects gone. The air felt thick, like it was holding its breath. The fisherman's instincts kicked in and he looked around, his senses heightened. "Dr. Harper," he said, his voice low. "I don't like this. It feels wrong." Dr. Harper didn't look up from the carvings. "It's just the place," she said absently. "It's ancient and there's so much to learn here. We're close to understanding it all." But the fisherman couldn't ignore the nagging feeling in the pit of his stomach. There was something more, something that had been hidden from them, something they weren't meant to find. He heard a sound behind him, a rustle in the underbrush. He turned quickly, but there was nothing there. Just the trees, the thick jungle, and the silence. Still, the feeling of being watched didn't go away. It felt as if the jungle itself was closing in on them. "We should go back," he said, his voice urgent. "This place, it feels like it's meant to be forgotten." Dr. Harper finally looked up from her work, and for the first time, the fisherman saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes. "What do you mean?" "I mean that something's not right," he said, taking a step back. "We should leave." But before Dr. Harper could respond, the ground beneath them began to tremble. The stone walls of the ruins seemed to shift, and a deep, resonating hum filled the air. The fisherman's heart pounded as the jungle around them seemed to grow darker, the shadows creeping in. Suddenly a loud crash echoed through the trees, and the ground beneath them split open. The fisherman stumbled back, his legs shaking as he tried to stay on his feet. "What's happening?" Dr. Harper shouted, her voice filled with panic. The fisherman grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the entrance of the ruins. "We need to get out of here now." But it was too late. The ground beneath them gave way, and the jungle seemed to collapse into itself. The sky darkened, and the air grew thick with dust. The fisherman could barely breathe as he dragged Dr. Harper back toward the boat. They were both running, the earth shaking beneath them, and the feeling of being watched growing stronger with every step. The jungle seemed to close in, and the fisherman had never felt so small, so insignificant. He could hear the hum growing louder, the sound vibrating in his chest, and he knew that they had unlocked something that was never meant to be found. And with that, the ocean ahead of them seemed like the only escape.